They laughed when he sat at the piano, but when his fingers touched the keys, the entire room fell silent. What happened next shattered their arrogance forever. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate shimmered under golden chandeliers, their warm glow reflecting off polished marble floors and opulent velvet drapes. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and aged wine, the soft hum of a string quartet filling the spaces between idle gossip and hushed conversations. It was a gathering of the elite, men in perfectly tailored suits, their cufflinks gleaming under the lights, and women draped in silken gowns, their jewelry catching every flicker of movement. Laughter bubbled between sips of champagne, a melody of wealth and entitlement, punctuated by the occasional clinking of crystal glasses. And then there was LeBron Wiggins, standing alone near the grand piano in the far corner of the room. He adjusted the cuffs of his neatly pressed jacket. He was tall and poised, his presence commanding without effort. His fingers twitched slightly, eager to touch the smooth ivory keys beneath them. But he remained still, waiting. From across the room, a pair of scrutinizing eyes locked onto him. A woman, her pearls heavy around her neck, leaned toward her, husband, and whispered, her lips barely moving. A moment later, a chuckle escaped him, low at first, then spreading. Soon, soft murmurs and muffled laughter rippled through the crowd like a wave. A pianist? Him? One voice sneered from behind. A glass of Bordeaux. Another guest, a silver-haired businessman, smirked. I'll bet he only knows jazz and blues, he muttered to a companion, swirling his drink lazily. LeBron heard them. He always did. But his face remained unreadable, his spine straight. He had played in rooms like this before, rooms filled with privilege, with expectations, with judgment masquerading as refinement, and he knew exactly how this night would end. LeBron moved with quiet precision, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the gleaming marble floor as he approached the grand piano. The murmurs in the room grew louder, their whispers blending with the soft chime of silverware against fine china. To them, he was an anomaly, a puzzle that didn't quite fit into the lavish backdrop of the Whitmore estate. A black pianist in a sea of privilege, one who carried himself not with deference but with certainty. As he lowered himself onto the leather piano bench, his hands resting lightly on his thighs, the amusement from the audience only deepened. Wealthy businessman, his salt and pepper hair slicked back with precision, leaned toward a woman draped in emerald satin. His voice was low, but not low enough to hide the smugness in his tone. I bet he only knows jazz and blues, he murmured, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The woman laughed lightly, twirling the stem of her wine glass between delicate fingers. Oh, do be kind, Charles. I'm sure he's adequate. More chuckles followed, some hidden behind polite hands, others blatant in their mockery. LeBron felt their eyes crawling over him like unseen hands, measuring him, labeling him, dismissing him. It was a feeling he had grown accustomed to. Silent battle he had fought in rooms just like this, behind pianos just like this. At the far end of the room, the event organizer stood, shifting uneasily on his feet. His fingers gripped the gold-trimmed program, his gaze flickering between LeBron and the expectant audience. For a moment, hesitation crossed his face, as if he too questioned whether this man belonged here. Then, with a tight breath, he gave a small reluctant nod, a silent command to begin. LeBron straightened his back. The weight of their judgment settled onto his shoulders like an old, familiar coat. Then, slowly, he lifted his hands over the keys, and in that moment, as the laughter continued, as the whispers curled like smoke through the air, he made his decision. He would not speak, he would not argue, he would let the music answer for him. LeBron exhaled slowly, allowing his fingers to hover just above the pristine ivory keys. The weight of 100 judgmental stares pressed down on him, but he had long since learned how to transform pressure into power. Then, with one bold, decisive stroke, he struck the first chord. The sound rippled through the room like a shockwave. It was not jazz, it was not blues. It was something unexpected, something transcendent. A hauntingly beautiful classical piece, its first notes blooming into the air like the opening petals of a rare flower. The melody poured forth, rich, layered, precise. Each note resonated, not just with sound, but with emotion, with years of discipline, with stories left unspoken, with a mastery that demanded to be felt. The transformation in the room was instantaneous. The smirks began to fade. Glasses of wine were slowly lowered to tables untouched. The once playful whispers died on stunned lips. Conversations were abruptly cut short as heads turned, eyes widening. For the first time that evening, there was no laughter. Instead, there was silence, pure, stunned silence. LeBron's hands moved fluidly over the keys, commanding them with effortless grace. The notes swelled, building into something more than music. A force, a presence, a truth that could not be ignored. A woman in a deep blue gown clutched her pearl necklace, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. The wealthy businessman who had mocked LeBron just moments ago now sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the pianist. It was as if the entire room had been thrown off balance. They had expected mediocrity. They had expected limitations. They had not expected brilliance. And now they had no choice but to listen. LeBron's hands danced across the keys, each movement precise yet fluid, like a painter conjuring visions on an empty canvas. His music was not just sound. It was a story, a living, breathing force that filled the grand ballroom with something intangible yet undeniable. The chandeliers above seemed to tremble with the sheer intensity of the melody, the golden candlelight flickering as if it too had been caught in the current of his performance. It was no longer just a recital. It was a revelation. The guests who had once whispered in mockery now sat frozen, their gazes locked onto LeBron, with expressions of something dangerously close to reverence. An elderly woman in pearls clutched a silk handkerchief, dabbing at the sudden tears that pooled in her eyes. The wealthy businessman, the one who had smugly assumed LeBron would fumble through an uninspired blues piece, now leaned forward, hands clasped, his arrogant posture replaced with something resembling humility. The true weight of the moment, however, fell upon Leonard Bianchi, a world-renowned maestro seated near the center of the ballroom, a man known for his impossibly high standards, his sharp critiques, his complete lack of patience for musicians who were anything less than extraordinary. All evening, he had lounged back in his chair, dismissing one performer after another with an unimpressed sigh or a glance at his pocket watch. But now he sat rigid, his body angled forward, his eyes unblinking. A hand, thin, aged yet steady, rose to his chest as though to steady the rapid beat of his own heart. Because he knew what true genius sounded like, and what LeBron Wiggins was doing in that moment was nothing short of genius. The room felt as though it had been transported, beyond the constraints of time, beyond the shallow expectations that had once filled it. The music climbed to its crescendo, every note thick with emotion, a symphony of triumph and defiance and something more, something undeniable. LeBron was not playing for their approval. He was playing for himself. He was playing for every unspoken battle, every dismissed talent, every assumption that had ever been made about who he was and what he was capable of. And as the final note rang through the air, as it trembled and settled like the last breath of a fading storm, the entire room remained suspended in silence. Not a single whisper, not a single movement, just a heavy, almost sacred quiet, one that no one dared to break. The laughter that had filled the ballroom before, gone. The condescension that had once lingered in the air, dissolved. In its place, something far more powerful, awe. For a moment, the silence held, stretching between the gilded walls of the grand ballroom, like the final note of LeBron's masterpiece. Then, applause. It began as a hesitant clap, slow and uncertain, as if the weight of their own arrogance made it difficult for some guests to acknowledge what had just happened. But soon, one clap turned into another, then another, growing, swelling, until the entire room erupted into a thunderous ovation. The same hands that had once lifted wine glasses in smug amusement were now clapping in awe. The very people who had exchanged mocking whispers now rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Their faces transformed by a newfound respect they hadn't realized they were capable of feeling. The businessman who had sneered at LeBron before, the performance now stood motionless, his face drained of its earlier arrogance. His fingers twitched at his sides, as if he wanted to clap but couldn't bring himself to. Instead, he shifted awkwardly, his eyes darting away in shame. Nearby, the elderly woman in pearls wiped a tear from her cheek. Her diamond bracelet caught the chandelier light as she pressed her hand to her heart, shaking her head in disbelief. And Leonard Bianchi, the maestro, the legend, the man whose approval was harder to earn than gold, he remained seated, staring at LeBron like he had just witnessed something divine. Then slowly he rose to his feet, the last to stand, the most powerful applause of all. His expression was unreadable at first, but then he did something no one expected. He gave a bow, a deep, respectful bow, not just as a musician recognizing another musician, but as a man humbled by the raw, undeniable force of talent. LeBron sat at the piano, still poised, still calm, as if he had known all along this moment would come. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys one last time, then stood, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't bask in the applause. He didn't smirk or demand recognition. Instead, he gave a single, polite bow, not to them, not to the elite, who had doubted him, but to the music itself, to the thing that had always been his true voice, his true weapon, his true shield against ignorance. His music had already spoken for him. There was nothing more to say, and in that moment they all understood. Talent knows no race. Greatness silences ignorance. The applause continued to roar as LeBron turned, walking away from the grand piano with the same quiet confidence he had carried when he first entered the ballroom.